R. Kelly talked like he was sure he could beat every allegation, so getting hit with a guilty verdict and a 30-year sentence had to shake him up.
Because for one, I beat my case. When you beat something, you beat it.
But now, new information is putting an old part of this story back under a harsh spotlight, and a lot of people are furious about what really sat in the dark for so long. This all traces back to a case that never truly went away.
So what made you decide to write your book?
It took a lot of thought.
On February 8th, 2002, the Chicago Sun-Times received an anonymous package in the mail, and inside was a videotape. The paper reported that the tape allegedly showed R. Kelly, one of the biggest stars in R&B, in explicit conduct with a girl who appeared to be underage. The details shocked people right away, and the story exploded fast. Kelly denied that it was him. Then on June 5th, 2002, he was indicted on multiple charges involving abuse material. He was arrested in Miami and posted $750,000 bail.
My son was the biggest reason I decided to write the book. Nobody is more qualified to speak on my experience more than I am.
What followed turned into one of the biggest celebrity court cases of the 2000s, and people watched every twist because the accusations were serious and the name attached to them was massive. But when the trial finally wrapped in 2008, the result left many people stunned. On June 13, 2008, Kelly was acquitted on all 14 remaining counts. The biggest reason the prosecution's case fell apart is still talked about to this day. The alleged victim in the tape never testified that she was the person shown in the video. In court, she was only referred to as Jane Doe. Without that confirmation, the jury said they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person in the footage was a minor.
And I really wanted him to have the true narrative of what really took place.
Kelly walked free, and the whole case was left sitting in a messy, painful space for years, argued over, picked apart, and never fully settled in the public mind. But for the person at the center of it, the damage did not just fade away. That person was Roshana Landfair. She was 14 years old when that tape was made. She grew up in Chicago, came from a family with ties to the music world, and had dreams of performing herself.
And it was the only true way I could reclaim my name, Roshana Landfair.
One of her relatives was Sparkle, an R&B singer who had professional ties to Kelly in the 1990s. Through those connections, Landfair ended up around Kelly while she was still very young, and that changed the course of her life. At that time, Kelly looked untouchable. He had sold more than 75 million records worldwide, won major awards, and made huge hits like I Believe I Can Fly, Ignition, Remix, and Bump and Grind. For a young girl in Chicago with music dreams, being around somebody that famous could feel like a big break, like a real door opening. But behind that shiny image, something much darker was taking shape. And that is what makes this moment hit so different now. Because that voice people are finally hearing belongs to Roshana Landfair, the woman the world knew only as Jane Doe for more than 20 years. For so long, this story was told by lawyers, reporters, prosecutors, and documentary crews. Now, the person at the center of the most important piece of evidence in the original case is finally speaking for herself. What she is saying pulls the curtain all the way back, not just on what happened to her, but on why the 2008 trial ended the way it did, how the manipulation worked, what the people around her knew or did not know, and why her voice stayed buried for so long.
I had to view the tape to identify myself and to be able to fully testify.
While everybody else kept debating the case from the outside, there was one person who had the clearest view of the truth the whole time. This is the story of Roshana Landfair, who she was before any of this, how she got pulled into Kelly's world, and what those teenage years ended up costing her, how it started, how it spiraled, and how the truth stayed boxed up for years before finally coming out. To understand what happened to Roshana Landfair, you first have to understand the environment around her. In the 1990s, R. Kelly was not just a famous singer. In Chicago's black music scene, he was a massive figure whose influence stretched far beyond concerts and radio hits.
What happened? Why did anybody advocate for you? Did anybody speak out for you?
Robert Kelly was born on January 8, 1967, in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood and raised in the Ida B. Wells public housing projects. He came from the same city, the same streets, and the same cultural world as many of the families who later crossed paths with him. That closeness mattered a lot. He was not some distant superstar people only saw on television. He was someone who showed up in the community, church performances, talent shows, local studios, someone who knew people and people who knew him. As his career exploded, Kelly worked with major artists like Aaliyah, produced Michael Jackson's song You Are Not Alone, and built a sound that mixed gospel and R&B in a way that connected deeply with listeners across the country.
It took a lot of prayer. It took a lot of forgiveness of myself, the people around me, and just really confronting who I really was.
His music was praised from pulpits, his songs played at family gatherings and neighborhood celebrations. So when a young girl from Chicago with dreams of singing encountered someone like rkelly, it did not automatically feel dangerous. To many, it felt like opportunity knocking. He first appeared around a church performance. That detail matters.
What did you have to go through to get to this point, to be vocal and identify yourself?
Think about the setting for a moment. A church carries a feeling of safety, of trust, of community watching over itself. Landfair was a teenager already developing her singing abilities, and music meant everything to her. In that moment, Kelly represented the exact future she hoped to reach. Experts who study manipulation patterns often describe a similar approach. The person doing the grooming finds something the target deeply wants and positions themselves as the person who can help deliver it. That creates emotional dependence long before any obvious boundary is crossed.
The rkelly girl. There's so much more to me than what happened to me when I was 14 years old.
According to Landfair's own interviews and her memoir, Who's Watching Shorty, the relationship started through family connections but slowly turned more personal. She described how Kelly praised her voice, gave her special attention, and made her feel recognized in a way that stood apart from everyone else around her. Then, the behavior gradually escalated. What makes this pattern so hard to recognize from the inside is that it rarely happens all at once. It unfolds step by step. Each moment feels like a small extension of the last one, something that can be explained away or brushed aside. By the time the situation becomes clearly wrong, the victim can already be deeply tangled emotionally and socially. At the time, Kelly's power in both the music industry and the local community made it easier for people around him to rationalize what they were seeing. Some convinced themselves nothing was happening at all. That pattern is not unique to this case. It appears again and again in scandals involving powerful figures across entertainment, sports, and religious institutions. Influence, money, and reputation can create a powerful shield that keeps people from confronting what might actually be happening. By the late 1990s, when the videotape was recorded, Landfair was only 14 years old. She had already spent years around Kelly's circle. According to her account, recording cameras were part of the environment she had been placed in. They were not unusual in that space. This was not described as a single reckless moment. Instead, it suggested a larger system of behavior that later became a major focus during federal investigations. The idea that Kelly's world functioned less like random relationships and more like a controlled environment around him. She was still just a teenager. At the time, she did not even realize she had been given alcohol. The full weight of what had happened only became clear much later in life. In fact, she did not watch the tape herself until years later when she was sitting inside a courtroom as an adult. By that point, the tape had already been circulating for years. Large parts of the city had seen it, whispered about it, argued over it. The investigation, the courtroom drama, the silence, and finally the acquittal. The 2008 trial is where this story becomes far more complicated than many people realized at the time. Kelly had first been indicted on multiple charges back in June 2002, but the trial itself dragged on for years because of legal delays and motions from both sides. By the time the case finally reached a courtroom in 2007, the cultural atmosphere had already shifted. Kelly was still releasing music, still performing, and in many spaces he was still being celebrated like nothing had happened. The prosecution built its case around the videotape itself. Their argument was simple. They believed the footage clearly showed Kelly and a minor. But the defense fought back aggressively, focusing on one key question: identification. They pushed the idea that the people in the video could not be definitively identified. And when the moment came for the one person who could answer that question without doubt, the girl seen in the tape, she did not testify that it was her. Years later, Landfair has explained exactly why that happened. The answer was fear. And this was not some vague, distant fear. It was real, personal, and overwhelming. During the later federal proceedings years afterward, she finally watched the tape again. By that point, she was emotionally prepared. But back in 2008, she simply was not ready to face it publicly. The reasons behind that silence matter because they mirror the same patterns seen in many cases involving powerful men. Think about the situation Landfair was living in during the original trial. She was a young woman who had been pulled into this world when she was only about 13 years old. For years, she carried the shame of something that had been done to her. The tape had already become public knowledge, which made the humiliation even worse. She was only 17 when she first learned that the recording was circulating. By the time the trial began, she was just in her early 20s, still trying to process everything that had happened to her. This was not someone who stayed quiet because she did not care. This was someone who had been manipulated as a teenager, raised in a culture where private family matters were often kept hidden, and surrounded by people who either felt powerless or unwilling to speak loudly on her behalf. Her family's connection to Kelly made the situation even more complicated. Her father had played instruments for him, and her aunt, the R&B singer Sparkle, had professional ties to Kelly as well. Those relationships created pressure that made the entire situation even harder to confront. During later interviews, Landfair addressed another rumor that had circulated widely at the time. Some people claimed families were paid to stay silent, but that accusation, according to her account, did not fully explain what was happening. The financial support being discussed was not simply about buying silence. That is the new evidence people are referring to, not paperwork from a courtroom, but the voice of a survivor who spent years being known only by a label. For a long time, she was reduced to a nickname used in headlines, Kelly's Girl, as if she were simply a footnote in someone else's scandal. But behind that label was a real person, a daughter, a friend, a coworker, someone who had a life before the headlines took over. Those everyday identities were pushed aside when the story became national gossip instead of a human experience. When she says she is stepping out of the shadows, it is not just a metaphor. For years, her life was defined by a nickname created by strangers who never knew her, based on footage recorded when she was still a child. She did not choose that shadow. But now, many years later, she is choosing to step out of it and tell her story on her own terms. One more fact is impossible to ignore when looking back at the timeline. Kelly was 32 years old when Landfair was just 14. That massive age gap often gets blurred when people debate the story through headlines and controversy. But when you see the numbers clearly, the reality becomes impossible to ignore. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that the silence during the 2008 trial was never the final chapter of Landfair's role in exposing what happened. She eventually testified in the federal proceedings. She identified herself publicly and did what she had not been able to do during the 2008 trial. But even after all these years, the consequences have not simply disappeared. In 2026, she has spoken about receiving threats from people still defending a man who is currently serving a 31-year federal prison sentence. This is the part of the story that often gets skipped when people talk about the R. Kelly case like it is already finished. The legal battle may be over, but the human impact continues long after the courtroom lights turn off. Roshana Landfair has chosen not to stay silent about that reality. Instead, she has been speaking openly about her experience and using it to help others who might be facing similar situations. She has also shared her story in her book, Who's Watching Shorty?, where she explains the years she spent living behind the anonymous name Jane Doe. The title of this video asks whether R. Kelly has been released after new evidence surfaced. The answer is simple. He has not been released, and based on current rulings, he will remain incarcerated for decades. The legal timeline makes that clear. On February 12, 2025, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit upheld his New York conviction and the 30-year sentence connected to that case. Later that same year, in June 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the appeal. Earlier rulings had already reinforced the Chicago conviction as well. In April 2024, the Seventh Circuit upheld that verdict, and in October 2024, the Supreme Court declined to hear that appeal too. With those decisions in place, the convictions remain firmly intact. So when people online talk about new evidence in the R. Kelly case, what they are really referring to is something very different from what many headlines imply. The information circulating now is not a new court filing or a secret legal document. Instead, it is the testimony and public statements of the woman who spent more than 20 years known only as Jane Doe. Her name is Roshana Landfair, and she has made it clear that she no longer wants to live behind a label created during someone else's scandal. That decision adds a powerful final piece to a story that remained incomplete for decades. The long and turbulent saga surrounding R. Kelly represents more than the fall of a once-celebrated music star. It reflects a broader cultural conversation about power, fame, and the systems that allowed accusations to remain unresolved for so long. For many years, Kelly's influence in the music industry appeared to shield him from full public accountability, even when allegations surfaced and legal cases began appearing. The combination of loyal fans, industry support, and complex legal battles kept the situation tangled in uncertainty. The emergence of new testimony played a huge role in shifting that narrative. When people like Roshana Landfair eventually stepped forward publicly and shared their experiences, it added clarity to a story that had long been surrounded by anonymity and unanswered questions. For years, the identity of the young woman connected to the infamous videotape remained a mystery in the public mind. By revealing who she was and explaining what she says happened, Landfair helped reopen conversations about justice, accountability, and the long-term impact that these situations can leave behind. At the same time, the case also highlights the challenges prosecutors often face when dealing with powerful public figures. The early investigations and the 2008 trial showed just how difficult it can be to secure convictions when key witnesses feel unable or unwilling to testify during the most critical moments. Over time, the role of media investigations, public advocacy, and survivor testimony has become incredibly important in making sure serious allegations do not simply disappear. Investigative journalists, documentary filmmakers, and people willing to speak publicly have helped bring attention back to stories that might otherwise have been forgotten. Documentaries, detailed reporting, and growing public pressure have all played a part in shifting how both the public and legal institutions respond to accusations involving powerful figures. These forces operate outside the courtroom, but they often help push difficult conversations back into the spotlight. The R. Kelly controversy also sparked a major cultural debate. It forced fans, audiences, and the entertainment industry to confront uncomfortable questions about separating art from the artist and about how celebrity status can influence how serious accusations are treated. The story eventually became part of a much larger movement calling for accountability from powerful individuals across many industries. People began re-examining past situations that had once been dismissed or ignored. In the end, the legacy of the R. Kelly case may not be measured only by the court verdicts. It may also be measured by the broader conversations it sparked, the courage shown by people who chose to speak out, and the renewed scrutiny placed on old allegations that once seemed impossible to challenge. Stories like this remind us that public awareness can shift over time. Conversations about justice, responsibility, and accountability continue to evolve, and the impact of one case can reach far beyond the courtroom. If you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more deep dives into major stories like this one.